talking with God about kings and kingdoms. This week, it is a house divided. So come on in. Let's check it out. 2 Samuel chapter 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20.
All the Bubbas of the world, we got one mission in mind.
Welcome to the Biblical Channel. Always glad somebody's showing up. We just like diving into the Bible because it is the source that will help you wring the chamois of life out to its fullest potential. Get these stories in your mind and in your brain, and you will be doing better in life. You'll be the smartest person in the room. That's always my goal, but anyhow, it is just fun talking about God and God's point of view. And my point of view is that people need to be brought away from the bullshit to the holy shit so that we can actually shoot the shit and sound like we know our shit. That's our motto here at the Biblical Channel. We're going to stick with that. Anywho, our hope is that your soul would magnify the Lord, just like Mary's did. A lady who speaks it right, and we need to pay attention to those ladies who speak it right. I'm doing my part. You're doing your part. Let's dive into this long series, 6 chapters, and it goes like this. These 6 chapters are, really the succession of David's, Bathsheba problem. They are the direct result of David having sex with a woman on the rooftop. It is the sins of the father that are now manifesting themselves. And the whole situation in Israel is spinning out of control. It's going to spin into now a civil war, full-blown civil war, where a father and a son, their civility has reached its end, and it drags the whole nation into it. And I just say that, this, kind of idea, or the ideas that flow out of this passage are the ideas that are all around us today. That is what makes the Bible absolutely timeless and brilliant. It's not that history repeats itself. It's just that we are the same as human beings. And God is an expert in humanity. And God is putting together his novel, and he puts his novel together, for us to learn from and to glean from and to, develop our senses from. That's all he's doing. He's helping us along. He's telling us a great story, and in that story, we can find everything that we need, in surviving the world in which we live. And that's God's goal for you, man. Surviving the life that we live. Anyhow, the title of this week's talk is A House Divided. Couldn't help but to think about, Abraham Lincoln. With that famous phrase, a house divided against itself cannot stand, seems to be the echo permeating through these chapters here. But to think that Lincoln coined that phrase, first of all, I think we just really need to give credit to God, because God's been talking about that all along. A house divided against itself cannot stand, and many other people outside of biblical counsel, smart Alex like those philosophers in Greece, said the same thing, because it's a generally recognized principle. And what we are, looking at here is just a train wreck or a car wreck up close. So this is a rubbernecking opportunity for us. And as we drive by, we're going to see, all of the usual suspects involved in what we call civil war. Lincoln was known for the Civil War more than anything, I think. Obviously, he was assassinated. And when you're assassinated, all things are forgiven. And people often ask me, I'm a big historian buff, and the issue comes up, do you like, what president do you like the best? And hands down for me, it's George Washington. And other people are surprised. They'll say, why not Lincoln? And I'm like, well, I don't think Lincoln was all that he was cracked up to be. In fact, I think Lincoln had nothing but the growth of the federal government in mind, whereas George Washington had nothing but the taming and the control of a federal government in mind. Abraham Lincoln was a character who indeed deserves our praise. He did a lot of great things, but we forget that, he really did want this war between the North and the South, and it wasn't over slavery. Lincoln himself made it clear, I'm not fighting this war over slavery. I'm fighting this war over state rights. Lincoln did not want states to have rights. He wanted the federal government to, basically be able to hold the states in check. Hey, I'm in a boring conversation now, but let's just say that I think David is that kind of Lincoln character. When you really do look at him, you're going to find plenty that you don't like. But largely, we come away with an impression that we do like. And there's lots to like about David. But these chapters here, just like Lincoln's Civil War chapters, start to reveal, a lot of weaknesses in the man David. And that is the point of the story. The point of the story is, what's so civil about war anyhow? And how did this thing begin? Well, it began by the uncontrolled senses of a man named David having sex with a woman, and that just bled into a family divided, and now ultimately God's house is divided. The nation of Israel is now divided. So anyhow, sins of the father was the last week's talk, and that just continues on to, we could have titled this Wayward Son, or maybe we could have considered, as a title, The Fog of War, and consequently the Fog of Faith, because there is that going on too. David is going to enter into the fog of war, and consequently, his faith is going to get really foggy as well. He doesn't lose his faith. It's just that he is now muddled. And this is what happens when a man embarks in sin. He becomes muddled in the mind. He can no longer think straight. He no longer has the capacity to act straight. And this is why we need to stay, 10 feet away from the nearest sin, baby. It's just that simple. So David is in a fog. He knows that the word of God is now against him, and he just doesn't seem to be able to get out of his own way. And in consequence, everything that God said was going to happen ends up happening. And but I think, the main thing that David will learn in all of this is that he has a trustworthy God that did not leave him and has not forsaken him. It's going to take a few moments for David to realize that. So let's just dive in at chapter 15, and let's just kind of plow through these 6 chapters. I encourage you to read them, but we'll just tell the story because the story is really fun. I hope the Chosen guys or Angel Studios picks up on these 6 chapters, because I think there is a wonderful movie, even a series, to be made in this. In fact, I'm going to do my part and try to put together something that I can forward over to those guys. They're smarter than me, but maybe they haven't thought about it. And these are chapters that a lot of people don't do deep dives into, so maybe we could look forward to that. And if you are not watching The Chosen and Angel Studios, please let me commend them to you. So without any further ado, chapter 15. Chapter 15 is just, it's pretty hilarious. Absalom is butthurt because his father did not fully restore him and treat him well. He's got him living in the kingdom, but he won't talk to him. And Absalom does what a rebellious, wayward son does. He starts undermining his father. And oh my God, how many times has that story played itself out? The wayward son rebelling against his father. Oh my God. And let me just make a note on that is a main thing in these stories and chapters of David is that if you don't take the time to be a good husband and to be a good father, meaning if you don't take the time to instruct your children, talk to your children, to talk to your wife, and if you don't make it a family, the wheels of the bus will come off. They just will, and they just do. Sometimes it's miraculous that parents who are dim-witted end up having excellent children, and that's just the providence of God at work. But by and large, if a father neglects his duties as a husband to his wife, and neglects his duties to simply talk straight to his children and to build a great relationship with his children, these chapters are what it looks like. This is this typical stuff that happens. So Absalom, sits at the city gates, and he's a good-looking guy, and he basically starts undermining the old man, and he says, "Hey, follow me, man. I'll do you better as a king." And so to me, it's funny because he really gathers these huge crowds, and he starts doing a little campaign circuit around the 12 tribes of Israel. It kind of reminds me of a Trump rally. Not that a Trump rally is bad. I've been to one myself. I'm just saying that, part of what's going on here is the rebellion of politics, and the nature of politics is rebellion. And no matter which side of the aisle, no matter which side of politics we're on, we're kind of in a rebelliousness towards the other side. And so Absalom, putting on all of these huge rallies, develops a huge following. And there's David sitting idly by, with his eyes closed. He's playing that monkey thing. Monkey, I can't see. I see nothing. I see nothing. Kind of like that old Hogan's Hero character. What was his name? I can't think. Anyhow, I see nothing. Well, David is daft, man. And so chapter 15, brings Absalom to the center stage. And in chapter 15, verse 19, all of a sudden, in chapter 15, verse 13 to 37, it's all about David is now on the run. And David leaves. So as soon as he hears that Absalom has this huge following, he hits the panic button. If you're reading this thing, you're kind of surprised. You're like, really? This seems to be an overreaction. It seems like David reminds me of that old Monty Python, scene where, I don't know, but any other guy says, everybody run for your lives. There's a lobster loose, cover yourselves in half butter just in case he tries to attack or something like that. But there's just this kind of ridiculousness, that David hears that Absalom is successful in his political campaigning. And when he hears, of this, he abandons the city and takes all of, his servants and his house, with him, and anybody who wants to follow him can go. And you're sitting there saying, man, that seems like an overreaction. It seems over the top, this lobster loose, run for your lives, kind of thing. David is definitely in the fog of faith. He's not acting out of his best, prayerful mind. He hasn't even consulted God here. He's just, kind of in movement mode. He just responds. And by the time it's all said and done, though, one has to wonder, well, maybe he was onto something, because Absalom does seem like he is ruthless and willing to play the dirtiest of all portions of political gaming in order to take over the kingdom. And clearly, Absalom is disconnected from God. Absalom has sought nobody, that might help him understand if God doesn't want him to do this. It'd be understandable if Absalom, counseled God and said, is my father not doing you well? And is there a successor, and should I be that successor? We don't find any of that kind of talk. Absalom is on his own. He is not in the will of God here at all. Anyhow, so there's a lot to be learned from David's little stint in exile. And the first thing that we learn from David's stint in exile is that while in exile, there are good things that happen. And while in exile, you find friends. And those friends end up being very helpful in your time of exile. So the rest of chapter 15 unfolds with three big characters that end up, coming along David's side, and their faith has not been shattered. They are not in the fog of faith. Their faith is crystal clear. So you have a surprising character by the name of Ittai. Ittai is a newcomer to the city. David and David even tells him, why don't you go? King David says to Ittai the Gittite, why do you go with us? Go back and stay with the king. You just came with us here. You're a foreigner. You'll do all right under him. He won't do anything to you. You don't need to follow me. And Ittai says, dude, the only reason I came here, and this is all in verse 19 to 21 in chapter 15, he's like, you're the reason why I came, but really you're not the reason why I came. I came because of my steadfast love for the Lord, and you are the Lord's king. And so Ittai's words are so crystal clear. And Ittai says, as long as the Lord lives, and as long as my Lord, the king, lives, wherever my lord the king shall be, whether death or life, there will your servant be too, because I follow the Lord God and you're his man. So Ittai is speaking clearly, and Ittai is a man of faith who is going to help David wake up from his fog of faith. And so then the next character is Zadok the priest. And Zadok the priest has pulled the ark and all of the priesthood out of Jerusalem. And David looks at him and he's like, oh, you know what? And then this, you can tell David is clarifying. He's getting clearer in his thoughts. He's like, dude, take the ark back. And I want you to take the ark back because this thing is going to be in God's hands, not mine. Ah, there it is. David is finally speaking clearly. He says, take the ark back, take the priesthood back, let's not get involved in this silly thing. And I think the main thing to see here is that David is very different than Saul. Saul thought that he had, that God worked on superstitious grounds. David here is not even a little stitious. He's like, dude, we're not doing the ark thing. We're not going to pretend like God is on our side. What I need to figure out, David is saying, is whether God is on my side. Because David knows that he has screwed up so much that he now, he needs to know whether or not God is on his side or not. And maybe, David seems to be convinced that, well, maybe it is the Lord's doing to raise up old Absalom against me. And so the king said to Zadok, carry that ark back in the city. If I find favor in the eyes of the Lord, he will bring me back and he'll let me see both it and its dwelling place. But if he says, I have no pleasure in you, behold, here I am, let him do to me what seems good to him. David is now clear. He is cool with the free will of life. And this is, perhaps a better way of saying it. People get into this silly argument over free will and whatnot. But faith that we have in God is totally comfortable with free will because we believe in providence as the big overarching thing that cannot be avoided. Many things are going to happen under God's watch. He will allow at times the evil to, what seems to be get its way. But we need to be reminded that evil will never win. God is going to defeat evil. That is the story of the Bible. Evil needs defeated. Only God can defeat evil. There it is. This is a story about how evil needs to be defeated once and for all. And when we get that in our mind and trusting God, then all of a sudden we become very comfortable with the free will of other people. We don't have to control them. We don't have to manipulate them. We don't have to do anything crazy. We just need to pray and say, man, I am God's, and he will do what he needs to do, and I will respond well. That's what David is saying here. He's getting his mojo back with his faith in mind. He's still going to be foggy at times, but he's getting it back. And it's the friends that he meets along the way that help him to start seeing clearly. The last friend that we have here is Hushai. So we have David going up to the Mount of Olives weeping, and David is a professional crier, man. This guy knows how to mourn like no other. So David's going up on the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went, barefoot, head covered, and David says to the Lord, this is a great moment because David finally prays. David says to the Lord, please turn the counsel of Ahithophel. And that's the other thing that has happened. David has just found out that Ahithophel has betrayed him. We'll get to that in a second. He says, turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness, and bam, Hushai, another guy, shows up. Hushai came in with a torn coat and a dirty head. That's funny. So anyhow, Hushai shows up as an answer to David's prayer immediately. And then David gets it. And he's like, oh, Hushai, you too need to go back. But here's what, if there's an opportunity for you to confuse the counsel of the king, swear your allegiance to Absalom. But if there's an opportunity, you'll be more useful to me that if you're on the inside than the outside. And if there's an opportunity to foil his efforts, well, there you will. So the providence of God involves the free will of people. And we're the ones who need to be comfortable with that. And David now is moving and operating in this realm. I got to tell you, though, God is putting together a novel, and you can't help but to remember that, Jesus' most famous, entry into Jerusalem is also beginning at the descent from the Mount of Olives. And this is just the thumbprints of God's storytelling, like this episode here where David goes up on the Mount of Olives and he's crying and lamenting over Israel. Jesus, as the rightful king of Israel, will come down, soon to be betrayed as well, but weeping over, the nation of Israel. That is just great storytelling, and God is putting together the best story ever, and it's a story that encompasses so many generations, thousands of years, like 3,000 years the story entails. Great stuff, great stuff, great stuff. Anyhow, the other thing that faith finds in exile is enemies. And so we get a picture of the kind of characters that you will meet when you are in exile. There is the manipulators who will try to take advantage of the situation. And so Ziba comes onto the scene, and David's like, where's Mephibosheth? Because this is Mephibosheth's handler. Remember, Mephibosheth is crippled. Ziba is his handler. And all of a sudden Ziba's like, oh, he threw you under the bus, dude. And David's like, dang, well, you get all of his property. And Ziba's like, oh, okay, thank you, King. You're so generous and you're so kind. Hold that thought. Ziba's a big fat liar. He's just taking advantage of the circumstances. Anyhow, the next guy is Shimei. Shimei is hilarious because as David and company are walking, they're walking out of town. They're on the run. They're in exile. This man Shimei, he is heckling these guys like nobody. He is a professional heckler, man. He is throwing David under the bus. He is blaming David for everything, and finally one of David's men, stands up. He says, let me go over and take him out. I'll just cut his freaking head off, and David's like, no. Once again, the enemies, sometimes can bring clarity to our situation. And David once again shows that he's very comfortable with other people's free will as he waits for God's decision. And David says to Abishai, who wants to go over and cut his head off, he says, behold, my own son seeks my life, and how much more than this Benjamite? Leave him alone and let him curse, for the Lord has told him to. It may be that the Lord will look on the wrong done to me, and that the Lord will repay me with good for his cursing today. There it is, my friends. There is good thinking, man. Lay low, hang low, pray, and let the free will of people go on. No need for vengeance, no need for retaliation, no need to control the situation, because God is in control. Now, there are things to do, don't get me wrong, but you don't go around punishing people that are rightfully criticizing you. And Shimei is rightfully criticizing David. He needs to be criticized. David knows it, and so he's not going to punish him. And then there is the bad man that you meet in exile, the betrayer, the Judas Iscariot of this scene, Ahithophel. Ahithophel is a dirty, rotten scoundrel who betrays David. Now, everybody in Israel thinks that this guy's super smart. Everybody thinks that he's as smart as God, but it turns out that this man is a betrayer, and he is crude, he is crass, and he is cruel. He tells he goes to Absalom. He says, "I'm on your side." Absalom says, "What do we do first?" And he says, "Go in there and sleep on the." He says, "I'm going to put up a little tent on top of the roof." And remember where the Bathsheba incident happened. He says, I'm going to put a tent up there, and you're going to go in and sleep with all your father's concubines, because that'll tell Israel that you're the real king now. The darkness, the depravity of the situation. It doesn't get any worse than that. The poor women, but this is war. And this is the kind of thing that men behaving badly do. And this is the rugged stupidity. This man is not godly at all. He is a man of this world, and he has betrayed David. And not only that, he has betrayed God with this hideousness of action. And so it's not going to be a big surprise. Oh, wait a minute. Let me hold that thought. Then the scene shifts just as soon as you're just ready to throw up with that dark and nasty situation of Ahithophel, and Absalom going up there and having sex with women and coming out and saying, I had sex with another one of my father's concubines. All of a sudden, providence starts to take over. First and foremost, Hushai, remember him? He does make his way into giving some counsel, and surprise, surprise, Hushai's advice is taken over Ahithophel's advice. That makes Ahithophel mad. But the narrator in the story in verse 14 of chapter 17 says the Lord had ordained to defeat the counsel of Ahithophel. So this is how providence works. When you pray, all of a sudden there's coincidences everywhere. I love that actor Russell Brand. He said that he became a Christian recently, and he said, man, I started praying. There's all these coincidences. He was being funny, but he's absolutely right. And that's what's happening here. Hushai's advice is taken. A woman at a well is going to save the day with the spies are going to report, the Hushai news to David, which reminds us of that Samaritan at the well. And it also reminds us of Rachel way back in the story of Jericho. Women who save the day is one of God's feature hallmarks in his story. And then there you go, the end of the enemy. Ahithophel can't stand the realization that his advice wasn't, followed, and he kills himself. Goodbye, Ahithophel, you and your darkness. Yuck. Reminds you of Judas. Once again, the Judas, and Judas too, can't, stomach the thought that things didn't go his way. I think it's complicated. Maybe he thinks that he's betrayed God and he feels bad. I don't know. But nonetheless, this is a Judas Iscariot situation, but Ahithophel is now off the scene. God's people start coming in from nowhere to support the king, and I mean nowhere, like outsiders. So Ittai was a Philistine to come to support David. Now you have Shobi, you have Machir, you have Barzillai. These guys are all outsiders. These are from foreign nations, and they are coming in for one reason, because they are on Yahweh's side. They are on God's side, and they know that David is God's man, and so they come in with all kinds of storehouses to support David and his people, so the tide starts to shift. David, mounts the forces. He gives he says, I'm going to lead from the front, and then he doesn't, which was probably, had he did lead from the front, he would have got what he wanted, which he wanted mercy to be given to Absalom. But as we find out, old Joab is a stone cold killer. He's going to have nothing of it. Again, providence reigns in the situation. And the old wayward son is just navigating through the woods, and he gets his head caught in the branches, and his mule leaves from underneath him. Lord have mercy. That is just good stuff. God takes him out just like that, but he ain't dead yet. And the guy sees that he's not dead, and so he goes to tell Joab, and Joab's like, why didn't you kill the guy? And he's like, because David said don't kill the guy. And Joab's like, you should have killed the guy. And the guy said, why? He said, Joab, you would have betrayed me. If the king was mad at me, you wouldn't have supported me. So this guy's smart. Anyhow, it's a funny scene. And at the end of it all, a Cushite who does not know how to not tell a lie, I guess, comes onto the scene and tells David everything that has happened. And Joab, again, stone cold killer, has his men and himself run spears all through Absalom. He's dead. The Cushite that can tell nothing but the truth, the whole truth, he arrives on the scene to tell David what's going on. So the house is divided, and that is the story. That's really where it is. David is a mess. He can't think straight. Joab is uber practical, and he's like, David, you are not being kingly. You've got to get over yourself. And Joab's right, but Joab's so uncomfortable as a character, but he's just so practical, he's so practical that he's probably not godly. David is impractical because he is godly at times. He wanted to give Absalom mercy, didn't happen. But the politics of David have just split the kingdom. So Israel and Judah are mad at each other in chapter 19, verse 9 to 15. David does get his head on straight, and he starts dishing out, equity and justice without any vengeance in chapter 19, verse 16 to 39. Shimei comes to David and says, hey, man, I was just telling you like it was. And David says, I know. And he pardons, Shimei. Mephibosheth comes onto the scene. He says, yeah, Ziba was lying to you. I never said those things. And David's like, dang it, I shouldn't have given him all that property. And then Barzillai, the 80-year-old, the octogenarian, comes onto the scene. And he's like, hey, man, I was just doing my job and helping the cause. And it seems like everything's going great. But again, in chapter 19, verse 40 to 43, the politics of division, the politics of rebellion are raising their head again, and the tribes of Judah and the other 10 tribes are back at each other's throats. Chapter 20, has Sheba raising to the scene to once again, wreak havoc and to stir up rebellion. The northern tribes are at it again, stirring up rebellion against the tribe of Judah and David in the house of David. And the author stops and pauses for a second in chapter 20, verse 3, to remind us that those women who were the object of Absalom's ridiculous and Ahithophel's, darkness, awful stuff, that they are the debris of rebellious politics, that people do get hurt. And when they're hurt, they're hurt for life. That, that's just the reality. And so the author is being very real about the real hurts that have gone on here. Then the scene goes back to Ziba and Joab, traps old Ziba in a city, and Joab's going to razor the whole city because he's such a practical guy. And this wise woman comes out to tame Joab, and she said, why would you do that to this city? This is a good city, this is a good place. Let me throw out the head of old Sheba. And she does. But there's the story and how it kind of ends. There's David's reign and how it kind of ends. And it just leaves us with that clear picture that if there is ever to be a kingdom of God, it is God that has to be its king. And that is the point of Jesus Christ. He is the rightful king that crushes the head of evil. Everything else is just the politics of rebellion. If men were angels, as our founding fathers said, there would be no government necessary. Ha ha. Government is a necessary evil. Politics will always be the schemes of man, but yet we are called to faith in providence, the providence of God, that political parties need to answer to God, and that we need to be comforted by God and God alone, because there is a king who has defeated evil, and we will never see him until he comes back, and his name is Jesus Christ. Well, this one took a little bit longer, but it didn't take that much longer. This is the house divided. And this is the house that will fall as well, because a house divided against itself cannot stand. And so Israel, at this point, we know that Moses was right. It's not going to last. And God is not surprised by this, because human beings cannot get past sin. We will need God to help us get past sin. And the rightful king that got past sin and gets us past sin is Jesus Christ. And that is what this story points us to and causes our hearts to leap for joy in knowing that there is an answer to the nonsense that we find in these chapters. We'll end our time right there. We'll catch you next time.